All right. So welcome everybody to the Informed Client 2. This is my really clickbait title of There's No Such Thing as Injury Prevention because it's such a buzzword type of claim. I didn't do this last time, and Amy wanted me to make sure that I do it this time. If you don't know who I am, which everybody in the room does know who I am, but internet people might not know who I am. My name is John Flagg. I work here as the head strength coach. I own an online strength and conditioning company called Rebuild Stronger, and I'm the wellness director for orthopedic and sports physical therapy. I'm also the head powerlifting coach and clinician for clinical athletes. So if you have any questions after this about all that, then please feel free. This is a kind of a hot topic because in healthcare, this has been kind of the holy grail for a long time, is preventing injury. How do we prevent injury? What do we do to prevent injury? And I'm going to take the time to kind of poke some holes just within that construct and give you guys a better idea of kind of the pitfalls of this kind of mindset and how we can change that kind of dichotomy. So yeah, saying something like there is no such thing as injury prevention immediately triggers me because we've spent 40 years trying to figure this thing out. Unfortunately, it's just not real. And there's a couple real big pitfalls when we start talking about injury prevention. You will see this slide 2 more times. Let me move my face here. You will see this slide 2 more times. We'll put it in every presentation. This is the underlying theme of the entire thing. If I can get you guys to have a little bit more self-efficacy, a lot of this stuff will go to the wayside. You'll see results pretty consistently and understand the ups and downs in training, and frustration levels will go down. We'll talk about the impact frustration has a little bit later on when we start talking about the psychological impact of injury. But again, self-efficacy is the big key for all of you. The more self-efficacy you can have, the more control you have over your training experience, and honestly, the more in-depth your coaches can go in with. Building this is a vital role to making it to advanced levels. Even if you don't want to be an advanced athlete, you can be an advanced trainee and see all the benefits. So really the first thing that we have to do in this whole thing is define injury. And in our case, the way we're going to define injury is an instance where we have performance decrease for an extended period of time or time loss, right? So that is a pretty broad range if we really, really, really think about it. In high contact athletics, that's obviously ranging anywhere from a concussion all the way down to a pretty nasty bruise. I've had soccer players that have missed weeks because of a thigh contusion. It can be surgery, it can be an ACL reconstruction or a rotator cuff tear repair, all of these things. And it kind of encompasses all of that. But we want to look at where we actually see a marked decrease in performance, right? So coming into the gym, being a little bit sore after like an increase in workload or something like that, we don't want to dictate as an injury, right? We don't want to say, oh, well, you know, I feel kind of banged up and I'm kind of tired. But you still come in and your performance, you may not be super motivated, but your performance isn't impacted negatively over a span of time, right? Or you just can't. Like obviously, if you're in a walking group, you can't go to the gym and work legs, right? That's where we want to kind of draw the line when it comes to injury. We're also going to look at, we have to define chronic and acute. Like an ankle sprain walking off the curb for the next week would be an acute injury. But something like chronic low back pain is an extended period of time. We see people deal with that sort of thing for 10 to 20 years. And we'll get into, especially chronic low back pain, one of the things that we want to understand after this presentation is that pain and disability don't always equal mechanical change, right? There's not always something structurally wrong. which is a really difficult concept for people to understand. Okay? So that takes me into the next thing, pain. This has been recently updated within the last 10 years, and the update of the definition is vital to understand the framework of what we're kind of talking about, right? So it used to be an unpleasant sensory experience associated with actual tissue damage. We added a lot of words. An unpleasant sensory and emotional experience, okay? And that's key word, emotional experience, associated with actual or potential tissue damage, or described in terms of such damage, okay? So here's the key. Pain is normal. Pain is a biological response to threat. It's an evolutionary trait that kept us alive. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's damage, right? My favorite, I have two kind of easy ways to relate this. One is if all pain were the same and you were sitting on your couch, right, watching TV, and somebody opened your front door and a lion jumped in, and you start running away and step on a nail, do you notice the nail? No. You're in a fight for your life. A lion is chasing you. There's an override, right? There's a threshold. So to understand that, and when we start talking about pain and injury, one of the things you want to realize, pain is, it's an alarm system, right? So if you're in pain for an extended period of time, opioids is another example where they can increase the total sensitivity to pain. Your alarm system or your pain sensors will decrease their threshold to fire, right? So if you're at home watching TV and somebody tries to break into your house, right? Your alarm system goes off in a normal response, right? Same thing as if somebody came up and punched you. You're going to get a response. People who are in chronic pain or people who have been on opioids for an extended period of time, a leaf will blow by their house and the alarm system will go. It's too sensitive, right? And that sensitivity can actually be decreased, right? You can build your threshold back up using things like physical activity, not opioids. That's why we have a problem. Okay? This thing's not working. All right. So what is wrong with the term injury prevention? I love this. To prevent something, we have to be able to predict something. And we suck at predicting things. Period. We're not good at it. We haven't really been able to build a large body of evidence to give us a causal link towards injury, right? And you hear a bunch of claims. And a lot of those claims are where we took the cart and put it before the horse. People created a problem, right? They create a solution like a particular movement screen or something like that. And then they try to backtrack and figure out if that thing will actually predict. That's not how, we can't do that, right? A true screen, like a blood pressure screen, we know there's a causal link between high blood pressure and cardiovascular, right? So we do preventative screens and look at your blood pressure over a period of time and track that. That's a screen. We have a problem, we have an indicator, we have something that can identify. The problem right now when it comes to injury prevention is we have a problem, we have no idea what the indicator is, but we've created screens to try and find what that thing is, which is not how science works. So what we end up doing is putting out all these claims and all these things and all these screens and all these products that have poor methodology when it comes to their research. Because again, we can't identify what's actually causing your pain. So how are we going to test using something, right? We make very poor assumptions and we put claims before the evidence. So a lot of the times, especially in fitness and physical medicine, you take a particular intervention, you make a claim about it, and then you do a bunch of research to see if your claim is true. But ethically, that's poor, right? If somebody said, hey, this is going to treat your diabetes, but you don't actually know if it's going to treat your diabetes, we give you that medication anyway, right? We can't do that. So that's where injury prevention falls short. We don't actually have evidence to predict injury, right? A lot of the claims that are being made about muscle imbalances and this thing being out of place or that being out of place, we haven't been able to actually get enough data behind them to say definitively, or even with any type of reliable direction, that, oh yeah, that is causal of injury. It may relate, it may not relate. We don't really know. All right, so this is my big word of the night. It creates an iatrogenic problem. Does anybody know what iatrogenic is? Iatrogenic is relating to an illness caused by medical examination or treatment. You can get a diagnosis, believe said diagnosis, and it can increase your likelihood of pain. Let's say it again. You can get a diagnosis, believe in said diagnosis, and it increases your likelihood of pain. Wow, I know, because it's an expectation. It's that emotional experience, right? It's one of my favorite studies, and I really should have linked it, but it's one of my favorite studies, taken over 50,000 MRIs. They randomly organized them. They had physicians look at them, and they said, divvy them up into two piles who are symptomatic and asymptomatic with low back pain, right? They were all over the place, absolutely all over the place. You had people, my favorite individual example out of this, a construction worker who literally had a vertebral body slip and in front of another one with no symptoms, working every day with no problem. You had other people with what we would consider a completely clear MRI and 100% disability, just bedlaid, can't move. Imaging and all these things that we make claims and we bring diagnoses for aren't necessarily reliable. And I know it's hard to kind of wrap our head around that, but that's because we've had such a mechanical look at the human body, and we've left out a lot of the personal, psychological aspect of the human body and the experience of being a person, that it's created this kind of ghost chasing. Kinesiophobia is another one of my favorite words for fear movement. It can at times. We haven't really been able to find a whole lot of evidence there with that yet. However, there are, because we haven't been able to link a lot of hormones with also mental illness, and we're still kind of working that sort of thing out, and that's outside of my scope. It's not my wheelhouse. It's an area of research that's starting to develop. So not a whole lot there yet, but I know there are people looking into it. But
we didn't see the MRI initially. When we saw it, it looked like a huge portion of his brain was affected by the MRI. We were shocked. He was, going so quickly. Mm-hmm. And the doctor said they cannot tell from the MRI how the person will be affected.
Oh yeah.
Just what you're saying, it's huge, but he was recovering quickly. He said somebody else can see this much of a problem in an area where we don't think it's going to cause the problem.
Yeah. Well, and when we relate it to exercise, and one of the things, this kinesiophobia thing is an interesting place for me, because I see it all the time. We focus so much on minutia and exercise. You got to understand, an MRI is a snapshot of that individual second that it's taken.
Yes.
So there can be a blur. You can have movement. At that particular time, you can have blood flow entering the area, and it'd be just like taking a super high level athlete, having them run sprints down and forth, right, and taking a snapshot throughout, and seeing that one time where their knee moved in like this, and going, oh no, they're in terrible condition. No, they're completely fine. He crushed it. He did great, right? It's a snapshot that's not necessarily reliable, because it's not like you can walk around with a functional MRI wrapped around your head all day and really kind of measure those things. And that's what makes these reliability studies really difficult, is that it's just a snapshot in time. It's just right now, right? Kinesiophobia is the fear of movement. Especially chronic low back pain, and what the old model has always been rest, don't do anything, right? So then you bring up these barriers to movement. You say, well, my back hurts. You go on the internet and you see these pictures that have a bunch of big red X's and green check marks, and you say, well, I can't do this anymore. And that becomes your defined you, right? If any of you guys have read anything in psychology, you start talking about schemas, where you have particular viewpoints that create who you are. And kinesiophobia can be part of that schema, where I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to bend over, right? I'm only going to lift like this. Well, that bothered me one day, so now I have to stop doing that. And you start taking pieces away to the point where, I have people that walk into the clinic that are, rigid, completely rigid. And they're like, I can't squat to death because of injury. Yeah, and that's another thing, especially when we start talking about chronic back pain. We're starting to find that these disc pathologies heal. They rehabilitate. They get better. 35 years ago, yes, your injury history matters, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But the likelihood that something 35 years ago is really you at this point, with how well the body adapts, probably slim. Now, there are instances where people have mechanical issues, right? There are people who've had a kneecap fracture and a femur break in a car accident. They're never going to get range of motion. That's a structural issue. But if we can't find some of those things, the disability is typically something else. So instead, the new kind of movement is to go towards the term injury risk reduction. This is really important because it adds a level of practicality to kind of what we're doing. There's a risk to everything we do, right? You can choke on your food. You can slip in the shower. You can drive completely safely and still have some asshole. There's risk to everything. There's risk to training. We'll talk later about how I have that on kind of an acceptability scale, right? For different populations, obviously risk is measured. But for me, a general rule of thumb is if it has an effect and it also has a side effect, then that can be a negative, right? But one of the things that we do know is that training or just general physical activity has a myriad of positive health benefits. Really, you can argue it, but a lot of the data is stacked towards it being probably the prime modality in regards to morbidity and mortality. Decreases life expectancy, it decreases the rates of heart disease and all these other factors. And it's still not something that I would consider the holy grail, but it's a part of the process. But that still doesn't mean it won't come with some level of risk, right? And that's kind of something that we have to understand. So what do we do? There are many factors that we can control and some that we can't to help mitigate injury. The big one right now in regards to physical fitness and training is training load monitoring, which we'll go over. All those, that gobbledygook right there, MRV is maximum recoverable volume, how much you can actually recover from in training, the total volume that you can take, so the reps and sets and all that kind of stuff over time. The maximum effective volume is how much you can actually be effective with. The maximum adaptable volume is how much volume you can actually adapt to, right? And then AC ratios are the new cool thing. They're only about 5 years, maybe 10 years old. That's acute to chronic workload ratios. And what we need to understand with all the training load monitoring is that you don't start with those. You don't come and do an eval with somebody and they're like, okay, well, this is where you're at. No, it takes at minimum 4 weeks to create enough data to track you, right? So it takes time. Just like we talked about in the last lecture, a lot of this stuff takes time, right? So to collect the information that's necessary for training load, it takes a little bit of time. There's psychological aspects, personal buy-in. We talked about that schema stuff, right? I put RPE here, rate of perceived exertion. because a lot of the times it is a bit of a psychological learning curve with that. And mindset with training, mindset with life, mindset with a bunch of things. And we'll get to that. Recovery is huge. Sleep and nutrition. We'll get into some of the other stuff there. But those are the two big factors. And personal history, your injury history, and it also includes a little bit of psychology. Okay. The last bit is effort. Effort is something I remove from all of that because it's one of the underlying processes of the entire thing. And we'll cover that in the very end. These are my cool graphs. The one on the left is acute to chronic workload ratio. And the fun part is we did a podcast with one of the leading authorities on this. And that sweet spot you see in there is really under contention. There's a bunch of people trying to knock that down, and this is already defined, right? But basically, what acute to chronic workload ratio is, we want to level out your training loads. So you see a lot of people, when they first start out, I call it the New Year's resolution, this kind of mindset, right? Is you haven't done anything for 2 years, January 1st hits, and you're in the gym 5 days a week for 2 hours, right? You went from a really low training workload to a really high training workload. And we've been able to associate a level of risk with that. The thing that makes it really confusing is a lot of the times with elite athletes, we can spike their training load and actually make them more resolute to injury and make them more resistant to injury at certain times of the season. So it gets a little confusing. But my general recommendation is obviously to not go from nothing to a lot or a lot to nothing to a lot. And that's what you see in injury a lot with chronic injury. If somebody gets hurt, they get shut down, and then you see runners are the #1 population. They get hurt, they're down for 3 months, and they go, okay, I feel good. And they go right back to the day that they got hurt on in the training plan, like right back at it. They don't lead in any, they don't build in any, they don't do any of that kind of scaling in, which spikes that training load super high, puts them into a little bit of a zone. The other one is one of my favorite and most confusing graphs. I put this one on there because I think it helps to illustrate length of time necessary to see change, and that as time goes on, you as an athlete will also change. So this is a scale for maximum recoverable volume and your total relative volume that you can put in. The green is leg training, the blue is pushes, and the yellow is pulling, right? So any deadlift, squat, leg focused stuff, pushing, and then pulling, right? When you're first starting out, everything's pretty equal. You know, you can do 3 days a week, push, pull legs, push, pull legs. But as you become a higher level trainee, it takes more in certain aspects to see growth, and it takes less in certain aspects to see growth. And that changes and fluctuates, and that's one of the reasons why self-efficacy is so important. Because if you aren't able to see those kinds of things on your own and monitor that on your own, then you're reliant on somebody else to find them. And one of two things happen. Attrition, stop. It's too hard to understand what's going on. Or the risk of injury goes up, right? Because you're doing all these pushing and you're already past the point of no return. So that's that training load monitoring. And again, this takes time to figure out. It's a skill, just like training is a skill.
You said earlier it takes about 4 weeks to find these stats. Within 4 weeks, you can find maximum recoverable volume.
I don't think so. I think truly finding your maximum recoverable volume is an ongoing process. And you know from your experience with me, I've had you on AC ratio. I've got a spreadsheet on my own computer over however long we've been together working on this stuff. So it takes to really have a more accurate picture. It takes time, and unfortunately, that picture changes pretty frequently. So it's constantly going like this, and it's one of the reasons why it's a better method than saying that we can prevent it, but it's still not perfect, right? It's still not the answer. Psychology. We got a random bullet point at the bottom there. buy-in or therapeutic alliance has been shown to increase positive outcomes. Therapeutic alliance is something we use clinically. And basically what that is the partnership between the clinician and the patient. The more those two see eye to eye, the more they move in a similar direction, the more positive outcomes you see. And that can be difficult, but you see it also in training. If you have a particular trainer or coach that you gravitate towards, your buy-in is higher, you tend to give to the program a little bit more, understand the program a little bit more, and go with the ebbs and flows in training a little bit more because you trust in the process, as opposed to being resistant to it. And when you're resistant to it, you tend to put up a bit of a wall, and then the effort drops down, right? Accurate RPE, or rate of perceived exertion, can assist in auto-regulation and the consistency of training. Rate of perceived exertion is one of my favorite things. With bodybuilding, Thursday you'll get a glimpse of this. It's also called reps in reserve. They're not exactly the same thing. Ideally, they are two separate things, but for the general public, I do conflate them together. Rate of perceived exertion is basically how many reps you have left in your set. So if you've got to do 5 reps, and I want it at an RPE of 9, 9 is like, I can only do 1 more, right? It's hard. It's really, really hard. That is also a training skill. But one of the things that we look at when it comes to longevity of training that you'll remember from last lecture is if you can stick to 80% consistency in the gym, then the likelihood of you reaching your goals is higher. One of the biggest frustrations, at least in the strength sports that I see, is missing weights, right? And this is how training has evolved. I would prescribe a weight. I would say you need to do 100 pounds for 5. Well, if the stars aren't aligned that day, you might not get down. And then you get pissed, and then you get down. And then next week, it's 110. But you were like, well, I didn't do 100 last week. How am I even going to survive this, right? It's more prudent as coaches to say, I want you to do this exercise for this amount of reps at this RPE. So if you're having a crappy day, right, and your expectation of training is lower, but your effort level is still really high, right? You still put in a 9 because I said put a 9. It is what it is. You know you put in good effort. You're going to get better that way, right? The weight on the bar matters less than the effort that you put in. And, one second, and it gives us the opportunity to go nuts on really good things. Because there are times when you come in and you feel like an absolute stud, and you are able to just crush stuff and break down a psychological barrier, right? There's nobody in this gym that I have to hairline attempt selection with. We're not to that level yet. And I would even argue, because the top powerlifting coach in the world, Mike Teixeira, talked to me about it this past weekend, he doesn't even do that with his world champion. So taking advantage of good days is where we want to be. We want to take advantage of that by tempering efforts in particular directions, right?
So you said the weight on the bar doesn't matter as much as that. So I mean, the first thing somebody says when they re-rack something, everybody says, "Oh, that wasn't a 9. That was like a 7. You got more in you." If it felt like a 9 to me, is that more important than adding weight and trying for a real?
So it depends on the athlete. And I hate to cop out with an it depends answer. But I think accuracy of RPE is also a skill. I think you have to have people around you to say, that looked comfortable, you didn't break position, the bar moved really well. Because I'll be honest with you, my least favorite feedback in strength sports is it felt heavy. No shit. You're a strength athlete. It's supposed to feel heavy. The whole point is moving heavy, right? So it comes to a point where everything is going to feel heavy. I haven't had a training cycle where stuff didn't feel heavy. But there's a skill involved in the accuracy of RPE where your old 7 is now a 6, right? Where you change that framework and you really find what a 9 is. You really find what a 10 is. And you really find where, an 8 is. And that also takes time.
But if there's a psychological aspect to it, if I come in and I do something and it feels like an 8 to me, do you think that might be enough to stimulate the
At times, yeah. At times, yeah. The guidance is, I think that's where coach-athlete relationship is really important. To say, okay, you know what, that moved really well, and you've seen how I've changed the way I deliver my programming. I'll jump you the next week, and I'll say, okay, you know what, that looks pretty easy. We're going to go to this, and we're going to hope to have that at an 8, right? And it is perceived. There are times where stress is going to get you down, and your body's just not prepared, and an 8 feels what you think should be an 8 feels like a 10, and that's just where it is. Again, RPE is not perfect, but I think it's better than prescribing particular ways where people kind of smash their head against the wall.
Because I know I've done powerlifting days and stuff where I was really happy with the attempt, and then I walk off and people are like, "Oh, you left kilos on the platform." And then I'm no longer happy with that attempt. I'm like, "Oh, you're right. I should have probably gone up." And now I beat myself up over something I was happy with.
Okay, so that's a whole nother monster because in that instance, I think people need to mind their own damn business. So this is the internet troll realm, right? Oh, you should do this. You don't know this athlete. You don't know the context of what brought them to where they are right now and what their training history has looked like. I've had somebody blow me up for a particular cue I've used with the girls. They don't know them. They don't know what's worked for them, what hasn't worked for them, the cues that have worked for them or haven't worked for them. All of that is a relationship building thing. And when the peanut gallery at a powerlifting meet or strongman competition or one of these things starts to holler in the mob mentality, I can't stand it because they don't have the contextual framework to understand what's happening, right? Because I hate that. Because I've had people, and you've experienced yourself, you had a huge PR if you're like, oh, dude, you had more in you. And not in a positive way. Like, there's times where, you smash a 500-pound deadlift and come off the platform, and I'm going to be like, dude, that was great. You smoked that. You probably had like another 10 pounds in you, but that was amazing. You killed it. We were great today, right? Other people are like, oh, dude, come on, are you sandbagging or something? That's just, again, that's a mindset thing, right? That's that negativity that other people kind of seep in, which is something we can't control, unfortunately. And again, some of that stuff comes with training skills. Some of it comes with like, dude, screw you.
No, really.
Yeah, knowing who to listen to, knowing where to be, and trust me, with all of these things, with everything we talk about in here, there's a level of doubt, there's a level of insecurity that every single one of us has. And those things chip away at it. And it doesn't matter who you are. It's gonna dig at you. It's just learning to push it off to the side, which is super difficult for a lot of people. We already talked about self-efficacy having a long-term impact on training longevity. But it also helps when injury occurs. Because when injury actually does occur, that self-efficacy, your self-identification can help push you past those things, right? So that's important. Recovery. Sleep and nutrition are the two largest factors when it comes to recovery. I understand. I've got 2 kids. You might not always sleep super great. You got allergies. You're sick one day. Those things happen. You slip up on your nutrition. Everybody does that. But those are the 2 largest, most controllable factors when it comes to recovery. There is not a thing in the world that you can purchase, that somebody can do to you, that you can get externally that's going to do better than sleep and recovery and nutrition. I don't care what tool it is or what they claim it does. It's not more powerful than those 2 things, right? It just won't overcome poor sleep and recovery. Because the definition of supplements is to complete, right, or add to. That means there's something here already that's a substantial amount of the puzzle. So I think everybody kind of knows those 2 things. Your history. Your injury history does matter. And one of the reasons that it matters is because it ties into your psychological aspect, right? You have an expectation. Well, you brought up I hurt myself 35 years ago. Your expectation coming into training or coming into physical activities, that's going to limit you because that's your injury. If you tore an ACL in college and you had a reconstruction done, that changes your injury history. And in some instances, I've got people at the clinic who did not rehab properly, and it's still a limitation, and that has to be addressed. Injury history matters. I don't say that it's not something that isn't a part of the puzzle. It's just not the entire part of the puzzle, which is what a lot of people do. They say, well, I got a bad knee, so I can't do anything. No, you have a knee that we have to work with and get around, and it will be fine. And your body will adapt, and you will adjust, and you'll become resilient and a badass. Your previous training history and your training age matter. So training age is pretty much how long you've been going at this thing. It doesn't really reset because even if you train powerlifting for 10 years, you took 5 years off and you came back, you're still going to be appreciably stronger than like the average guy walking into the gym. And a lot of those things are going to come back because you have that technical base, even though some of it may have gone away, right? There's a degradation, but the adaptation comes up quick to fill the void. And that's what we talked about earlier about atrophy after injury. If you have a hypertrophic base, right, if you have a particular type of muscle mass, you get hurt. The likelihood that you're going to come back to that level is pretty high, right? Now, you're never, I don't want to say never. With certain injuries, coming back to previous level of activity is very difficult. But that doesn't mean like hypertrophy and stuff. Okay? Your history comes together to create your expectations, and they have a large impact on mindset and outcome. So if you had the expectation that you are going to be limited by a particular thing, then you're going to be limited by that particular thing. It's just how your brain works. I have bad knees. So every time you do a squat or you do something, you have the expectation that your knees are going to hurt, or that you need to do it in a particularly different way, which means that's what you're going to do, even if you are capable of doing the things being asked. And that's the tough part, is exposing yourself to those activities, building a tolerance to those activities, and then continuing on with them over time.
I think it also about like really being open in the moment to what you're doing and what's possible, right? Because I'm thinking every once in a while I say something about my knee, and I go, well, you don't really know, you never really say, well, you know what you're capable, you know what's going to happen. But I have to remind myself about these things.
And there are things that change when we start talking about, being a 20-something and a 30-something and a master's level athlete. But it's not a hindrance, right? The total amount of volume that you can handle right now is less than a 20.
Of course,
But,
yeah.
exactly. But that doesn't mean you can't make progress. And I think that's where people are like, well, I'm too old to do these things. No, you can make progress. And where you're what's that?
I was going to say, you also have more control over your schedule, your finances,
I mean, there's a level of freedom there too. That's kind of nice. Yeah. You don't have kids crying at 12 o'clock and you got to squat heavy tomorrow. So that is actually a great point, Barrett. And then I'm going to come right back into effort, and I put it separate. It's this hidden determining factor that a lot of people don't take into account. It will impact the total volume and intensity that you work with. The most common place I see it is in basic fitness programs or in like bodybuilding type programs where you have 8 to 10 exercises all for five or 10 or 5 sets of 10 or something really high, right? If you're putting in the right amount of effort, you're not making it halfway through that much. You're just not. It's just too hard to sustain that level of effort through that much work. People kind of coast through those things, and then they have days where they go really, really hard, and then they're just so sore, and it creates that fluctuation that we were talking about. If we keep effort consistent, you'll end up finding out you can do more with less, right? And that's huge. But it also means that you are actually a modifiable risk factor, right? So, and Barrett and I see it all the time too. There's the other end of the spectrum where guys are maxing out every day and just absolutely crushing themselves under the wheel to try and get stronger and failing a lot. And, there's two ends of the spectrum. You can try to go too hard and you can go way too easy. I like that middle ground, right? Good hard effort, come into the gym, get it done. We talked about it last time, that 8 or 9 RPE. That's where the kind of nice place is where you can have long-term sustainable effort. And again, it goes back to training as a skill. If you get better at it, then you get a higher training skill and you get more results out of less work. Yeah, I had to put Thanos in here. Unfortunately, the unfun part is injury is going to happen. All of us are going to get injured at some point doing something, whether it's something mundane or if it's trying to better ourselves with physical activity. I do put this on an acceptability scale. So if you are just here for general fitness, I don't want to put you through a lot of risk, right? That risk is going to be relatively lower. We're going to make more adjustments. We're going to change this. We're going to change that. The higher you get towards pushing elite, the higher your risk is inherently going to be, right? Because you're training harder, you're pushing boundaries, you're setting new limits, you're doing things that other people have never done. Your risk is going to be higher. And I think if that's your goal, right, if you want to be an elite athlete, particular thing, you just have to accept your risk is going to be high. And there's nothing we can do about it. We can modify all those risk factors. We have high octane athletes, for God's sakes. Reuben Foster today for the Washington Redskins did something on the third snap of OTAs. The third snap of the whole offseason. And he was carried off in a leg immobilized. Right? Third snap. I'll argue that he probably wasn't prepared. But it's going to happen. And what we have to understand is that's okay. Right? Especially with the population that we're talking about and you guys, it's a much better alternative than what can happen if you're not physically active. Because we know what's going to happen there. Cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, all these other risk factors that we don't want, right? We'd rather stave those off. I'll take a couple hamstring strains. I'll take a couple ankle sprains. I'll take that stuff to be healthier over the long term, be more independent, and be a little bit more psychologically robust than the alternative. When it does happen, your understanding of it and how to manage it are key. And that's kind of a topic for the next talk. But if you are managing yourself very well within training, managing yourself with injury is a lot easier because you've been there. We are starting to look at rehab and training as just one long continuum as opposed to two separate things, right? Rehab is just scaled down training. And you scale it up, scale it up, scale it. What have we done with your shoulder? We scale it up, scale it up, scale it up, scale it up, and now all of a sudden, hey, we're back, we're training, we're doing our thing. We just scale up training the same way. So that's, if you figure this stuff out, a lot of the other stuff kind of falls. Questions, because I think that's it. Yep, Thanos is my last slide. Question. Everybody's thinking hard. I like it.
How do you figure out what is the mental part of injury and the pushing part? Like, how hard is it? Like, what's your best advice for athletes who are in the middle of that?
You're going to fail. You're going to mess up. So we've created this dichotomy that you're either always right or you screw up and now you're done, right? We do it with nutrition as well. People are so hard-lined that if they slip or make a mistake that they fail. It's going to happen. You're going to have days where you overreach a little. You're going to have days that just aren't there. But what we need to understand is even if you are completely healthy, you're going to have days where training's just not there. And it's part of the process throughout the entire thing. We have to be smart about that, right? We have to know when to push and when to pull back. But you never really stop activity. Does that answer your question? it's a fine line and it's difficult, and there are going to be times where you just don't do it right. But that's going to be okay because you're not going to spontaneously combust, right? It's not past the point of no return, unless you play like a super contact sport like Australian rules football, and you just kind of throw yourself out there against somebody trying to take your head off. There's a fine line there, and part of that is, again, coach-athlete relationship, clinician-patient relationship, and being able to go through that with some sort of partnership to go through. Anybody else? Barrett's mulling something over. I can see him. So Sue.
I can really relate to the whole fear of moving thing. When I started with you and my kids, I had this deathly fear of the deadlift. When I was little, and I had to push myself.
Yeah, you have to get over that.
Yeah.
And we've been sold this bill of goods that pain should be avoided at all costs, which it's not possible. There's no way to go about that. Running away from it and increasing your kinesiophobia, which is exactly what you're explaining, limits you to a point where you'll never get independence back unless you face that, right? And that's one of the things you have to do. You're not going to fall apart under load. You're not gonna take that injury and make it catastrophic. It's not how it really works. And I know, you hear these anecdotal stories of, this happened to me or this happened to me, or I was doing this and my rotator cuff exploded. Yeah. A lot of these things are normal degenerative change. And I don't even like using the word degenerative because it makes it sound like your body's falling apart. It's just not. Some of these are just normal changes. It's just what happens. You can be a completely healthy individual, and somebody can take an MRI or something and find something to do on you, which may not be bothering you in any way, shape, or form, and doesn't increase your risk for injury. And that's a hard thing to wrap our head around because we've been told for so long this fragility story.
Hey, I broke my back when I was 15.
Yeah. Can anybody tell? Nope.
I'm sitting in my chair.
I was just gonna say, when I first started with you, I remember I was saying, I can't squat because I have a problem with my shoulder. You were like, oh, that was before. You're probably healed by that. And I was like, you probably noticed the inside of something.
Yeah.
I can't even believe it.
You gotta be kidding me.
I know, exactly. That's what I was doing. And then I tried it. I was like, oh my God, I actually can do this. So, that, I just had that in my head that, that I didn't think about it getting better. I just had accepted that limitation.
Well, and then again, too, we created a process around it, right? I didn't say, oh, you're fine. Get underneath the bar and do blah, 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 blah. We brought you in, got you under the bar. We did a couple, some of just to come under and hold, not even unracking, just to build your tolerance to the position. Until now, what do we do? 80 for sets of 3 today? And we were just working with the Bella bar before. No, it was the black bar, the 15-pound bar before. So you just got to build into that.
How do you get started with something like this? Does this have to be a one-on-one relationship, or if I've got an athlete who comes in once every 3 months, convinced that he's going to get hurt, he jumps right in with everybody else, tries to keep up with everybody else, and gets hurt and improves for him, then he should just drop out and not do that.
And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right, yeah. And I'm just like, I can't get him to regulate because he doesn't know what a 6 feels like. He's not been doing a 3 for months. I can't get him to, hypothetically, this person,
I know what we're talking about.
I there's no self-efficacy there because he doesn't. I didn't for a long time see this as my life. I saw this as something that I do in my off time as a hobby. How do you get somebody to say, if you're going to do this at all, you need to take ownership of it for your own health. You need to communicate, you need to self-regulate, you need to do all this stuff. It's just like, you barely have enough time to just come in and do a program.
Yeah, so part of that's an education process. And that is at that point probably a one-on-one thing where you got to sit them down. And I don't want to say have an intervention, but have an intervention. And just be like, look, like this is where we're at. Because he is on that spectrum of time loss. You know, he comes in and we have a legitimate injury and he can't do X, Y, Z from, you know, that point towards another particular point in time. And it has to be addressed at that point. And that is difficult. We're talking about behavior change as part of this, right? And behavior change can take upwards of 6 months in disciplined people who want it. So when we start talking about behavior change, does add complexity to it. But a lot of it is starting off with that education, doing some of this stuff, either one-on-one or in that group setting. And it's tough because sometimes you got to rein them in and be a hard ass too as a coach and say no, because X, Y, Z. It's not an easy answer on long-term athlete management. Those are tough cases too, because they're very resistant. Building that therapeutic alliance we talked about is hard. So. Anybody else? Where'd Barry go?
She didn't have this. So making stuff.
All right, guys. I think that is a close.
Thank you.
Thank you.